queering grief. Grief, something both of us talk about a lot.
Yeah.
So, I would love for you to just kind of introduce yourself and why you're here chatting with me today.
Yeah. Who am I? My name is Jess DeVries, and introductions, they're so weird. I am a somatic sex and masturbation coach in Portland, Oregon, in the U.S. And have a deep, deep passion for connecting people to their pleasure without bypassing the fact that grief is so present in our sexual expression, our embodied experience. And so I spend a lot of nerdy time thinking about exploring, supporting folks with pleasure and with grief. And I teach workshops, and I like to garden and sew, and talk to plants. Yeah, that's me.
And you have a particular grief workshop coming up?
I do. I have a workshop specifically. I have a couple, but specifically starting on September 9th, which I think is 3 weeks from today. 3 weeks from today, called Pleasure Your Chest, and it is a 4-part workshop series for trans masculine of center folks who have had top surgery. And so creating space to be with the fullness of that experience and to not leave out the parts that are hard or sad or feel like a loss within the process of moving towards something that you've wanted for however long you wanted it, and now have, and the complications and beauty of that. And so I have a co-facilitator, Corey Doty, brilliant educator out of Victoria, BC, a small group container, and we set the container. We have a whole piece on pleasure and scar work and attending to the emotional body, an entire day specifically for grief, for witnessing, for being heard, and holding space. Yeah, it's just really beautiful. It's a beautiful place to be fully in your experience. So that's the big one. And then I have twice monthly mindful erotic grief groups. Yeah. And that is, what does your grief need today? And can give a little or a lot of that to your grief.
Mm-hmm.
The experience. So, yeah.
Yay.
Yeah. What about you, Ro?
Let's see. So I think in particular to this container, I want to speak to, I do scar care, gender affirming, post-operative scar care, and I've been doing a lot of double mastectomy, F to M scar care this last couple of months, and I hold a fuck ton of grief. I hold a fuck ton of tears in my arms and in my lap and, in my heart. And it's joyous work for me because it's something I can relate to, having been through top surgery and releasing my breasts. So I saw your circle, and we've talked about it several times, and I hosted a live circle here in Montreal. I'm in Montreal, Quebec, and I had so many people message me to say, okay, but online, please. So I was like, oh, that makes sense. So in October, I'm doing kind of a hybrid course that's like, there's a lot of content online, almost like a self-paced e-course, but then once a week for 3 weeks, we get together collectively and go through very similar things. And that's opportunity for that collective holding and hearing of different story formats and learning together and skill sharing, how we're holding the grief and how we're inviting pleasure into the care work, the ongoing care work that we have with our bodies after the surgery. So, yeah. But, yeah, that's what I got. So.
Yeah.
Yay. We talked about starting with the little embodiment practice. Do you want to kick that off?
Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, I'll do a little hybrid of some things that I do, but the invitation will be to connect with where your grief is in your body. And if there is a particular shape that your body wants to be in around that, to see if you can move towards that, welcome it, lean in, and fully stating that it is an invitation that you are welcome to decline, and that is just as valid as doing the practice with us. So, yeah. Let you get cozy, whatever that means to you. I'm just going to sink a little bit deeper in my chair. Yeah, and take a couple breaths, however you're breathing right now. We don't need to change how we're breathing, just showing up with a little more attention to our bodies. And then I'll invite you to say out loud or inside your head, I am grieving.
I am grieving.
And just notice if there's any particular sensations, images, or colors present anywhere in your body as you say those words. Everybody's grief looks different and shows up different in your body. So it may be loud and hot and very present. It might be hiding in certain corners. It's also possible that it's way too tender to even imagine it inside of your body, and so it might be in a box in the corner of the room. Yeah. So if you find it or if you don't, both are just great. Yeah. And if you can, inviting maybe a little bit of touch or breath to move towards the grief. And then if you notice it wanting to move or your body moving around it, just allowing that process. I'm noticing that I'm clutching my chest as we're doing this. And just, thanking your body or not, but for just showing the shape and where the grief is today. And we don't have to do anything more than that. So yeah, welcome to your grief on this Saturday afternoon.
Oh, I greatly appreciated that. Thank you. Yeah. Why? I wonder if thinking about being with grief, being with our grief, engaging with our grief, maybe even befriending our grief, at least acknowledging our grief, wherever you might be. I'd love it if you might share a story around kind of your grief, a grief that you have. Maybe that's present, or maybe that used to be present, you could tap into as you prefer.
I think what I want to share, like the the light bulb of like how and why pleasure and grief. I had, among many losses, the third week of January 2020, like I had a breakup. I had a partners say they were moving away from Portland. I lost one of my safe spaces in the city, and also had a friend die unexpectedly in 7 days. And so one of those is enough. One of those is enough. And I flew down to Oakland to be with my community who had lost Brooke. And we were in the way that like embodied sex positive community does, where we're like, all right, like how much space do you need? Do you need to be engulfed? Do you need this? Do we like barely touch each other but we're present? Lots of dissociation. That's my go-to. I need to be out of my body with that much pain. And then I was at a cafe. I would like to name it because their broth is so good, but I don't remember the name. But I was there with my friend Elena, and I got the broth bowl that had like some vegetables and a little bit of meat in it. And as soon as the broth like hit my tongue, I just started weeping. And I was like, holy shit. Like food, I don't know. Sex and food are like very close to the top of pleasure for me.
Sure.
And so like, I was like, my love of food, my love of broth, my love of like feeling the care of something prepared well completely bypassed my dissociation and brought me back into my experience of losing my friend and being there with my dear one who had also lost their friend. And so like that was like the awakening or whatever of like, oh shit, like how much are like these things really truly connected? How can they support each other? So, and yeah, her birthday is the 26th, so it's coming up on like an intense time for thinking about that person. So it is past, and it is actually really present this week.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I bet.
That's that grief right there. The short version.
Mm. That resourcing, learning, when we have those aha moments of learning that we have a resource, I think, I mean, for me, those are like, suddenly I realize this key on this key ring that I didn't realize I had unlocks this access. Oh.
It's like a miracle. It's a miracle. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
That is the word I would use for that.
Yeah. I think it can be really hard in those moments to remember we have that key, you know, even after we know. Building practices, I know, is part of both of our works of like, first of all, finding what is the thing that allows us access to be in our bodies again, and then how do we remember to utilize that? Oh, yeah.
Would you like to share a grief?
Okay, let's see. Um, when I was young, 19, 18, 19, 20, I had a really rough couple of years. I won't even go into it, but suffice to say, I'm very grateful to be alive. And I found myself using BDSM to come back into my body. Because I was not, I was not in my body.
Yeah.
Did not know how to be with myself after so much trauma, years of concentrated trauma. And I was using kink with loving, caring people to help me come back to my body. And the physical pain in a container that felt safe enough, knowing that I had, my voice at any moment to say, I don't want any more. Like, being in a place where I felt empowered to have that choice and voice was huge to begin with after everything I had been through. But then I was using the physical pain to allow the emotional stuff to finally bubble up, because my father really modeled for me, the resource of shoving it all down really tightly. Which of course, eventually explodes. And I knew I wanted to do something different, but I didn't know how to do that. But I had figured out that physical pain was allowing me access to that stuff I had shoved down so tight that I didn't know how to reach. And at one point, my partner, who we've now been together for 20 years, was, I think, flogging me, and I had all that welling coming up, and I was crying, and I was getting this sense of relief, of release, and then I kind of folded inward and got quiet. And he came up right behind me, got right in my ear, and said, if you shove that back down, after I just did all this work to bring that up, and you showed up for it, I'm gonna be fucking pissed. And it was so helpful. My body's prickling right now because it really changed my life, that little moment of him being like, you do grief work to release. You don't do grief work to feel. That's something else. We'll find pleasure. But you do grief work to release, and you can use the pleasure to help with that. But these are not the same thing. It was deeply impactful for me of no matter what route I take to move from being with grief into a process of grieving, my trajectory that I choose for me is to move towards release or alchemization, some sort of transformation, so that I do not bring myself back into sitting in the grief, but creating more expansiveness to use that energy in a way that is kind of composted for supporting new growth. So, yeah, that was maybe my first there's a different way to engage with grief, and I feel it in my body. So, yeah.
And you had community support, right? You weren't alone with that.
Yeah, it was the first time I really had felt help. Yeah, in my life. Yeah. So, yeah. Magical.
I might be crying over here. Don't worry about it.
I really get it. Yeah. Me too. Do you want to share another one?
Oh, do I share one to transition into our next?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So people who know me know that I was Christian. People who don't, I used to be evangelical. And I think the most similarly to the grief that surrounds us when we actually pay attention to it around our sexuality, our body expression, our pleasure, because of the cultures that we live in, and sex negativity and puritanism and all of that. Like, grief is present. But also the specific grief of leaving a community, leaving a spiritual community, leaving a traumatic spiritual community. And a lot of time people don't want to process the grief of that, right? You just want to be, I'm out, I'm free, I can do whatever. You don't have to think about that anymore. And as Ro just like demonstrated with their story, like, it's all in there, right? It doesn't go anywhere until we let it go somewhere. And so I left the church, which meant I lost most of my community, because one of the really terrible things I think about evangelical Christianity is the us and the them. And when you are no longer an us, you are a them. And there's not a lot of space for gray area. And so I was very alone. I was in my mid-20s, and like, oh, I actually can be sexual. You don't have to say that for my future husband. Saying those words sounds so funny now. But I started, I'm a long time masturbator, but I started noticing as I was masturbating that, like, that movement of erotic energy through my body was pulling up all of these other emotions. And, like, you can imagine a good Christian girl freshly out of the church, with just a handful of friends, like, no sex positive community, no, like, sex positive community, what even is that? But that's another life. And then being like, okay, so I'm masturbating, and then I'm screaming, and I'm crying, and, like, I had enough wherewithal to, like, be like, does this feel okay? Does this feel right? Does this, like, good is a weird word, like, does this feel good? But, like, and checking in and being like, it feels necessary, right? And so, like, I was secretly doing this masturbation grief ritual for years. And not talking about it because I didn't have anybody to, like, I'd never really talked about sex with anybody other than, like, don't have it until you're married. And so I was like, this is just a fucking weird thing that I do that has to be a secret. But, like, it was very much, like, the pleasure of my body and the power of the pleasure in my body is alchemizing all of this pain from my church experience, from my upbringing, all of that. And so, yeah, I think that's where I'll leave that. Yeah, but, like, I don't know, not knowing, like, my body knew. Like, I didn't know, I had no context for this at all. Like, now I have context. Yeah, of course. Like, 26-year-old me, I was just like, this seems to be helping.
Yeah. What a resource.
Yeah. Also, a little overwhelming to be like, okay, am I just gonna cry and have all these massive feelings every time I masturbate? Happy to report that no, not always.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, I don't know. It's, yeah. There's powerful stuff inside of us.
That. Yeah, finding those resources. What grounds us when we're filled with grief? What brings us into our bodies safely? What allows us to feel connection with other people, with ourselves? I think that's a beautiful exploratory part of the work that you and I both do. So, Knick-Knack Tattoos asked a question about thoughts when grieving a sense of connection and safety within queer spaces after having some traumatic experiences and feeling like you can't trust many folks. You want to take a quick stab at that?
I was like, wow, this is a timely question.
Mm-hmm.
I think specific to that question, and then specific to queerness in general, like expanding the idea of community, right? And so, like, I'm assuming this is human to human community, but a lot of times when I am in a space of not having connection for whatever reason, like, where is nature in that? Where are animal friends in that? Can I let that queerness hold me while I'm navigating the complications of human? Like, trees are not complicated. Cats, yeah, they have their, like, but they're not complicated.
Complex, but not complicated, yeah.
Yeah, they're not in the way that humans are. And so, like, where in the fluidity of that, like, where can you find community as, like, and be held to have enough, like, space to release and let go, and be witnessed if the humans can hold that space for you. Because, I mean, like, yeah, I mean, people are people.
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, and so using that as an option. I don't know if you have anything to that.
Oh, I fucking love that. I mean, I've created for myself at one point for a major life transition a pod. You could look up pod mapping. And I've been a part of, I just finished up being a part of a pod. And just the exercise of pod mapping, whether you actually create a pod or not, I think is a huge resource to say, like, what are the resources closest to me that hold me? You know, and maybe it's masturbation and sitting under that particular tree in the park and this one friend that you talk to once a year but actually is up to talk for a little bit more during this time, and that other person that, you know, does see you regularly and can give you physical touch. Like, mapping out those resources for ourselves that, just as you said, like, may not be human, and allowing ourselves to have, I think of it as having dates with those things, like putting it in my calendar and being like, let me treat this this time with myself. You know, maybe it's I'm going to cook myself my favorite meal, and I'm going to have it, you know, I'm going to go to a park and I'm going to have my own little private picnic. I love having solo picnics. And really honoring that time as if I'm doing it with somebody else. Like, I wouldn't cancel on a loved one, so why would I cancel on myself? Doing that for myself. And it's one of those things that sometimes it can be hard to get the ball rolling, but I never regret it afterwards. I'm always like, yeah, I was right. That resources is me. Even if it feels like it's going to take resources to do it, comes back 10 times, so it's worth it. So yeah, mapping those things out for ourselves, I really agree. And I think especially those things that can bring us pleasure, need not be erotic, but just a sense of spaciousness or even numbness is sometimes preferable over the grief or the pain or the challenge. So just looking for those gaps to slide ourselves into for a minute. Yeah.
That's like, thank you for that slide.
Yeah. So, past, present, future, like, why is learning the skills of, like, I think of it as like moving from being with and holding grief to the care work of grieving as an action, like the importance of learning these skills.
I think so. The folks that I learned most of my grief knowledge from, they have no longer teach these workshops, but it was Being Your Human out of Toronto, and they describe grief as an automatic process that the body begins when you experience a loss. So, like, rather than a feeling, it's more like digestion or labor, where, like, when it is time, your body begins the process, right? And so, I'm gonna say it. I'm in the U.S. Canada is a different country, but also we're very similar in a lot of ways. Like, grief phobic, like, we are afraid to turn towards that. We don't offer space for that. We don't, particularly like my lineage, white Christian lineage. There's like, in death, they say like, oh, they're in a better place. Like, we bypass all of it, right? So there's not ritual, there's not any of that. And then particular to like our queerness, right? We stand outside of whatever fucked up norms those are, right? So like the loss of one of my partners 3 years ago, in a breakup, many of my friends were like, well, you have 3 other partners. They don't live in Portland, so like it's not like you see them very often anyway. So like the minimization of the experience of queerness, the very real like legislative things where you're not allowed to, or maybe not. Who knows? The world sucks. I'm not going to get into it, but like we're allowed to be present at deaths or connected to children. Because marriage, which is the contract that is the thing, wasn't allowed for everybody, right? And that's just romantic death, caretaker-child relationships, and then we talk about like having parents that wanted our sexuality to be different, having bodies that we wanted to be different, having a gender expression that doesn't fit what people want. Like, we just go, we're like, they go and they go and they go, right? And so, all of that, if it doesn't have space, gets stuck or it comes out sideways or calcifies. And so, like, learning the skills of how to do that, how to grieve, how to witness in community, how to share, because it does need to be, like, we need to be witnessed, we need to witness, helps us process that and helps us be, like, more in our bodies, connected to experience is connected to what is happening in the world around us, right? And then we're connected to our pleasure, right? Because it's like if you allow yourself to let that movement feel, like then you have more access to everything else that's in your body and the capacity in your body, right? And so, yeah, it's a great. That was a long intro.
I love it.
Yeah, but the skills that I teach are like generally very basic. I will add in one other note that I just recently learned that I find really helpful and important. But so metabolizing grief in the body, helping it to move, helping it to come out. It needs movement, and it needs sound, and it needs a place to share the story, to be witnessed. Right? And so, like, we've both expressed, like, masturbation, kink, like, movement and sound, eating food. Like, I am putting food into my body. I'm making noises because it's delicious. Movement and sound. Like, breath is movement and sound. And then you can go as big as you want. Like, what is the shape? What is the shape that your grief needs to be, wants to be? There's no wrong way. They're literally, like, you cannot do it wrong. Like, you can't do it wrong. And then sharing the story, like, right, so our circles that we're doing, that's a version, right? If you're a painter, painting your grief, that's sharing the story. Do you sing? Do you want to record yourself masturbating your grief out? Like, that's sharing the story, even if you don't show it to anybody, right? It's putting it out into the world outside of yourself, whispering it to the wind, right? And so those are the three, like, they're the three ingredients, right? It feels a lot like olive oil, garlic, and onion, right? Like, you just need those three things to make a million different, like, delicious dishes. So movement, sound, sharing the story. And then the thing that I learned recently that was like, oh shit, is that for grief to feel safe enough to come out, if you are in active trauma, like, the trauma wants and needs to be tended to first. And so, like,
Step one.
Figuring out ways to decipher that. And the main one is, like, trauma pulls in, it pulls away. It's a separateness, right? And grief is so connected to love that it is a coming towards, right? And so, like, is it trauma? Is it grief? Maybe it's a dance. Like, we get to experience lots of things all at once. But if it feels hard to access the grief, maybe trauma wants to be seen and held first. Yeah. So that's why it's important.
Fuck yeah. I love that naming that trauma, the acuteness of trauma needs to be tended to first. And I think I'm now really excited about this idea of sitting with, noticing those difference between the two because when you said, like, what grief feels, I had a sense of, the word that came to me was desire, and a sense of seeking connection, which is not how my grief lives at all. So I'm like, nope, I'm gonna need to cloister myself away. I have work to do. So, not that I always do my grief care alone, but my first pass for my grief, I do prefer to do alone before it feels so, to me it feels so fragile, you know? And so I actually like to sort of engage with it more, so it's more full, and I'm more comfortable with its fullness before I want to share it with other people. So Yeah, I like that exercise, thinking about how to sit with our grief versus sitting with our sense of trauma and how they live differently, so we can really be able to pinpoint those, when you're in it a little more easily, a little more quickly. Yeah.
Or pinpoint it for each other, right?
Yeah.
Back to community. Like, you might not be able to see it when you're in it.
Oh, no, I often can't.
Yeah. Me neither. That was the collective you.
Yeah, I feel you. I love that. And teaching one another, like, this is what it looks like when I'm unwell, in a variety of different ways. That's a huge resource. I love that one. When you have access to that kind of support. Yeah, one of my favorite, I guess, ways to think about why, or the importance of my work of grieving, is the resiliency building that I get out of it, of knowing that I can be with these things that are so painful and I can come out on the other side. That to me is deeply warming, I think. Yeah. So,
Well, and I think also the unknowing, like, it feels, I think that's why the labor metaphor is so apt, because, like, labor is an intense embodied experience that most people like to be like, it was joy, like, it was beautiful, it was this, it was that. And it's like, maybe it was, but also, like, if it was spoken about in the actual truth of it, like, if we spoke about grief and, like, it will annihilate you. Like, certain losses will destroy you. You will be different forever. And that's just the nature of it, right? And if you know that, then you're not also like, why am I not able to get over this? Why am I like, why can't I eat? Why am I eating too much? Why am I like, why can't I cry and I just want to like clean my house all day and like, or, why am I researching everything about car accidents with Subarus? Like, like whatever it might be, like, it's all normal. But we don't talk about it to know that it is normal. And so then in the middle of trying to process it, it's, like, I also have to have all these feelings about, like, I'm not doing it right, and I, whatever's there, which is part of the reason the original facilitator, Jaden Love, and I, like, we built this group for transmasculine folks because, right, there's, you got top surgery, oh my gosh, your chest, it looks amazing, like, and then there's like, well, you're not allowed to have hard feelings about it because it was so fraught to get there. And, well, if we have hard feelings about it, are they going to take it away? Like, that possibility, like, if we vocalize, like, all of that stuff. And then as people now get to have surgery, like, if we talked about it, then they're like, it would be like, oh yeah, like, it's going to be great, and it's also going to be hard.
Yeah.
And you're not weird, and you're not, like, broken, or, like, not trans enough or queer enough because you are questioning this thing, right? Yeah, telling the truth about the fullness of experience.
I love that so much. I think that we know how hard our communities have fought, to get us this access, and we want to honor that and appreciate it. But that sometimes doesn't leave space, for the complexity of being able to hold the multiple realities of, I have joy and I have pain and I have grief and I have excitement, And then to see that sometimes, see that grief weaponized against us, it's a lot of fear that builds up, right? So I'm so grateful to know that there are spaces in this world that are explicitly holding that. I feel like with the bottom surgery support that I do, it's very similar in a very different way. So, yeah, deeply appreciated that. So those the skills of grief. Sapphic Gay Man made a point about dancing, and that's one of my absolute favorite ways to engage with grief is through music and dance. Yeah. So, yeah.
It's, I mean, there are, like, I often, in my large life of Christianity, my 25 years of life, I spent 4 of those attending a Black church in Chicago. And, like, the way that praise and feeling the Spirit and all of that, like, Black church is also, like, it is a praise and celebration, but it is also a grief, like, ritual in those spaces. And I like the dance and speaking in tongues and wailing and all of that. Like, whether or not you believe in Christianity or whatever, like, that particular expression of it, like, very much is a process of, like, embodied tending. And so it's like, yeah. So there's that kind of dancing, there's this kind of dancing, there's sex is kind of dancing.
Yeah.
Right. There's lots of ways to dance.
Yeah, bingo. I know for me, one of the biggest skill sets that I find a resource with grieving is being able to name my attachment. Being able to really, really look at the grief that needs to be done about the attachment versus maybe the fullness of the thing. And for me, that is often a hinge that really makes the difference for me to be able to blow open the rest. So I tend to beeline straight for where's my attachment to the change that's happening, or the change that isn't happening that I was expecting, and how do I grieve the attachment to allow for the spaciousness of something else to be. And I often find it helpful for loved ones to remind me when you've had other hard things that have happened of loss, think about the places you ended up and the ways that you took those people with you, or those experiences or whatever it may be. Yeah. And I find that also to be deeply helpful to remind myself, you've been through some fucking crazy hard shit before. Look at what came out of that. You got this. So, yeah. Helps me be like, oh, right. This care work is important. I really need to be in it, not rush through it, but I need to really root into the grieving.
Yeah. And you, like, I don't know, you can't rush through it.
Oh, but we can try so hard, can't we?
Sure can. Yeah, and then also it's forever too, right? There's varying acute phases, but even still, like the last grief gathering I did, Mindful Erotic Grief, was the day after the 23-year anniversary of the loss of one of my childhood friends, right? And the last 4 years, that anniversary has kind of come and gone, but like this year, like I was barely able to hold it together to facilitate the group, right? And I'm like, I don't know what it is about year 23 or like what's it's still very present, and that's normal and okay.
Yes.
Like it doesn't. There's no timeline. Right.
There are griefs that I'm committed to maintaining, for sure. That are important to me, that I've built into resources within my life, that I actually, I wouldn't say I cling to them, but I deeply appreciate them, you know? Like, my mother died when I was 5, and when I circled back in to do a lot of that grief work through my 20s, I realized that I had, 15 years of not grieving her, really. And so I actually wanted decades of grieving her and being with her and inviting her into my life, and like imagining, like, not what would have been, but imagining that she was with me, So, and that's become such a huge resource for me to feel the grief for my mother. And my father's mother died when he was a child. And so there's this generational mother loss grief. And moving into my 30s, I invited my grandmother in. And yesterday would have been her birthday. And I love it. To me, it reminds me of like candles that we light in vigil for somebody. And if I want to keep that candle lit till the day I die, because that's a resource for me to connect with that love. Fuck yeah. So it's really, really important, I think, to allow ourselves to let these things live as they may.
Yeah, I'm thinking about just like the skills of grief, and that like I think dial soap is gross personally, but it smells like my grandfather, and so one of the sinks in my house has dial soap in it because I want that smell near me.
Yeah.
Use it, and then I also, every time someone comes over, I'm like, this is actually dial. Like, if you don't want to smell like dial for the next 3 days, like, use the soap in the bathroom, right? But like, in that relational piece and that attachment piece, like, where are we? What is keeping your mother and your grandmother close? Like, is that reciting their favorite poem regularly? Is that wearing something of theirs? Is that like lighting a candle, having an altar, telling people about folks that we lost? Like, I think that's another part. Especially like in the disenfranchised space of queer grief, like being able to name and celebrate our losses and our wholeness.
That's one of my favorite things when there's a loss, is to, whether it's a breakup or a friend breakup or a death loss or whatever it is. One of my favorite things to ask is like, or just invite, is, when you're ready, I'd love to hear about this person, about what they meant to you. Like, I'd love to hear a memory, things like that. I find that precious. It's because my grandmother died when I was a kid, or when my father was a kid, and then my mother died when I was a kid. I asked my father at a very young age, like, tell me about grandma. And I remember him saying, oh, I don't remember much. And thankfully, I thought enough ahead to be like, you were double the age of me when your mother died. And as an adult, you don't remember her? And it scared the fuck out of me. I did not want to forget my mother, and so I would lay awake at night before I'd go to bed, And instead of having her kiss me goodnight and read me a book, I would go over memories of her, you know? And then later, I started writing those memories down. So I can pick up that book. And some of them I've forgotten now. And I'm like, oh, no, it happens. And I read these memories and I'm like, oh, yeah. I don't know that I would have been able to recall that without having this living transcript I've been creating for myself because of my father's inability to deal with his own grief. Like, he just didn't have the tools or the resources or take the time. I mean, he lost a mother, a wife, and then a second wife even. So the man is locked down. But being able to see that contrast and be like, oh no, I want to do something differently. I've been forever grateful for that modeling of what I didn't want to do with my grief.
Yeah. Ooh, that made me emotional.
Yeah. I love that. I love telling people stories about my mom. It really delights me, you know. And lots of people I've lost. I love it when people ask me, like, oh, tell me about that person. You know, it's hard sometimes, and sometimes it's really joyful, and most of the time it's both, you know. But they live on in me that way.
Yeah.
I enjoy that with breakups, is inviting dates with those people after the fact without them, you know. So I get to have a solo date with the person I miss. It doesn't mean I want them back in my life. It may or may not be that so, you know, but being able to engage with the ways that we connected, that I appreciate, that I loved, that I adored, and really center what they brought into my life, I find is such a helpful release to those transitions. It's helpful to kind of lay down that story with the pleasure centered when doing the grief work of disentanglement. So.
I'm like, ooh, I need to go on a couple of those days.
And pulling out the calendar. Okay.
Yeah. And then this one. I think also, like, taking that piece and getting more specific about it of, like, I don't know if folks know the word titrating, but, like, which is, like, we're in the hard part, and now we're going to swing back to this part, and then come here. And so, like, part of the reason why pleasure is important in this capacity is, like, grief often, usually, I feel pretty confident saying usually, is overwhelming, right? And, like, our body will regulate and all of that, but, like, what do we need to swing back over to the pleasure piece? Like, was the breakup fucking terrible? And you need to be in the anger and the, like, pain and whatever, and then, like, yeah, like, you fell in love with that person for a reason, or you played with that person for a reason, or whatever, like, the dynamic of the relationship was, like, where was the pleasure and the joy in that, and honoring both, right?
Yeah, even if that's 10%. But allowing ourselves that 10%.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, you could be an absolute fuckface, but also, like, we had a lot of laughs, and you got, like, like, whatever it is, it's like, it doesn't, I don't know, for me,
yeah.
It doesn't do any good or justice to leave out parts of the experience, like the shit and, like, the gleam I'll get to be there. Ideally.
That's a skill set, being able to hold multiple truths. That's a skill set one builds up, right? I think that can be extra hard if we don't have that. But I think that's like a base layer skill set that really supports grieving, is being able to hold multiple truths. Yeah, yeah. Are we feeling a little complete rounding this out?
Yeah.
We're just going to keep going, I know.
About
But
all the things.
Yeah. I would love one more time for you to kind of share your invitation for your beautiful upcoming event, and IFS, definitely.
So pleasure your chest.
Mm.
I love play on words. It starts September 9th. It is every Saturday for 4 Saturdays in September, 10 a.m. to noon Pacific time, and it's virtual, so you can join from anywhere in the world. And it is for folks on the trans masc spectrum who have had top surgery and just want to, one, tend to the emotional body that's connected to their scars, to pleasure, to grief, to be in community, to be held. And it's a really special embodied space. And links to that are in my little bio. They're also in Corey Doty's bio. It is on Eventbrite. That's the other place that it is.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you can access it, or feel free to message me if tech gets weird and you can't find it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Right after y'all's ends, I'm doing one that's a little different, and for the first 3 weeks of October. Also grief and pleasure. It's more of a hybrid so that folks can kind of do the work that they might want to do via an e-course, so self-paced, and then we have 3 circles where we come together on Zoom to connect and talk about the individual care support we're building for ourselves with the resources around us, and what we're doing for ourselves and with ourselves, and be able to skill share some of those pieces. So there's a lot of grief practices, but we're going to be doing more of the mirroring and acknowledging of that, and then inviting pleasure and joy into that. So I'm going to allow folks a little more privacy, I think, because I think that's one thing that I adore about what y'all are doing, is the mirroring. I agree, is so fucking vitally important. And much of the feedback that I got was some people are just not ready for the mirroring. So there's multiple options, which makes me so happy. You know? We're going from not talking about this stuff to having multiple different formats and options and beautiful, incredible people. It's just my heart is bursting about it, but
the dream is to have as many blowjobs for cis ladies workshops. And those are endless.
Yeah.
Right? Having as many options for folks to find the care in the space, and the facilitators that really hold them well.
Yes.
As much access as cishet folks can have.
Yeah, we should have to. Yeah, everyone should have to. Yeah.
So,
I love that.
Yeah. Pleasure and grief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Ooh! I'm looking forward to the next one of these already. So.
Yeah.
More grief, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Always and forever.
Yeah. All right. Ready to sign off?
Yeah.
Okay. Bye, y'all.
Hey.
Love ya.
Thanks for watching after.